Following the release of the report, the Presidency says President Cyril Ramaphosa will make an announcement soon. But for more on the report and what the options the President has available to him now, we speak to SABC News political editor Mzwandile Mbeje. Good to see you, Mzwai. Welcome firstly back from the UK, and wow, did you come back to a storm?
Well, it feels like we've been back for so many weeks already.
Indeed. I mean, this is a big issue now that the President has been dealt. It really is. I mean, I suppose we should start by having a look at what this implies now. What are the implications for the President?
Well, they're quite huge. They're quite huge. I know that legally, so there are a lot of arguments. I think one of the operative words people are using is that he may have a case to answer. Sure, and well and good. But remember, this is a politician. He is operating in a political space, and this is the head of state. Here is then the question that must also be answered. If you are the head of state and you are already facing, remember the panel, it's not, it's a parliamentary process, but what makes it so weighty at the end is that it was being headed by legal people, retired judge of the Constitutional Court, senior advocate. So, which means those preliminary findings, if you want to put it that way. So, for me, I think they are almost tantamount to almost being charged. And then the question is, given what the ANC has decided must happen with people who are charged, what does he do? I know that he's not charged, but here's a panel led by eminent individuals, legal people, very senior, retired, so who supposedly have no interest in this. And then they come to this kind of decision. So the next step really for him in the next few hours or the coming days is for him to come out and take the nation into confidence. What is it that he's going to do? Is he going to stick it out? Or he's going to say, you know what, for my reputation and for the interest of the country, maybe let me take a step back.
Where is your money? Where do you think the President will come in? I mean, do you think he's going to give up that easily?
You know, I have been following him, listening to him, sometimes speaking to him. I think he's always maintained that if the processes get to a point where he is found wanting, he will have no issue of stepping aside. In fact, I remember even his presidential spokesperson, last week, when he was asked, if the president is charged, what will happen? He said, no, that's very clear. He will step aside. I even spoke to the chairperson of Northern Cape, Zamane Sol. I posed the question was very deliberate to say, so what happens? And he said, knowing how the president is, so if then he faces difficulty, he will step aside. I know we're not there yet.
Exactly, that's what I wanted to say. We're not there yet. I mean, obviously the findings are, and what it says is that the president has a case to answer to.
Yes.
I mean, for him to suddenly now sort of make a statement and say, well, okay, it's over, I'm going to step down or step aside or whatever the case may be, you don't think he's going to fight this tooth and nail until he has to answer to this?
He may decide to do that, but then here is the question, what is the cost to the country? If he then now goes to, let's say, another state visit, for example, he goes to Germany, chances are people will be interested in, oh, by the way, you have a case to answer. Instead of asking him about the investments that he would be coming to seek, they would say, but we know that in your country, so we were told that
you're kind of hiding money in your account.
And there's that element where your integrity starts to then wane. People may not take you seriously. People may start to poke fun at you. And remember, you are the head of state. You represent 60 million South Africans. So when you stand up there should be no shadow of the doubt of who you are.
Did this start happening in the UK? Because I remember reading articles in the run-up to it. I mean, I was already reading Sky and BBC and all of those, and every single one of these news organisations brought up the Phala Phala issue and saying, not that that's going to be a focus of this visit, because this is ceremonial and then he's talking business, but this is what's hanging over this particular president's head. So it's already been there, and now with this finding, it's big.
I think one of the things that he has been so strong about was fighting the issue of corruption. I think that's what he's really been saying out there in public. Of course, we can't conclude that this is corruption or whatever. But the fact of the matter is that here are allegations which have been brought before people who have the legal understanding of how these things operate. And then their conclusion is, based on what we have seen, chances are you have something to answer here. And the next question again is that the investigating agencies, SARS, Reserve Bank, NPA, so even the public protector, so who have been looking at this case, they've been having a lot of time to deal with it, and not much has happened.
Yeah.
These ones had about a month or so, and then they've come up with something. So it then puts the pressure again on those investigating agencies to say, well, you said you were not sure, so we have been given this process. Yes, it's a parliamentary process, but from what we've gleaned from these 6 weeks that we have been given, we see that something needs to be followed up.
Yeah.
Do follow it up. Because if they say there may be a case to answer, so it means those agencies now may start looking at that. But remember,
they should have already been doing. I mean, let's not kid. This should be a wheel in motion right now.
It means they must be at an advanced stage of making a decision. But also, there's a separate process which is happening. On Tuesday, this is being debated. And then what happens beyond that? So I know the impeachment process in its own nature takes very long. But politically, for me, that's what matters. And the ANC, remember, is meeting this evening.
Indeed.
NEC.
So let me quickly ask you these questions, because we've got to wrap. I mean, many people saying that this is the first step in Ramaphosa being removed from office, just this finding from yesterday. Now we got the NEC meeting, the ANC NEC meeting. We have the Nasrec conference coming up. We also now have succession planning, because the reality is that, I mean, we've heard this from former President Thabo Mbeki. He mentioned it. He actually said a little bit ago, a few weeks ago, basically saying, has the NEC seen who is going to take over if, in fact, he has a case to answer to? And now the fact is he has a case to answer to. Paul Mashatile's name keeps coming up here, that this could be the biggest beneficiary of all of this. But talk to me politically, what happens now? Where are we going?
Okay, let's start with the NEC. The NEC meets this evening to discuss this matter. I think they'll find themselves between a rock and a hard place. In a hard place, because they are empowered to make those decisions, but they are 2 weeks away from the conference. Do you want to make the biggest decision whilst the structure that can make an even bigger decision is 2 weeks away? So that's why some people, I can see some of his backers in that NEC to say, no, let's leave this thing to the conference. And then number two, you go to someone like Paul Mashatile. I spoke to him, you'd remember, about 3 days ago, and then asked, so what are you going to do when this happens? Because remember, he is leading nominations, the president, and Zweli Mkhize are the people who are contesting for the position of the president currently. And they are both, yes, they are both not charged, but they are both faced with certain issues. Digital vibes, Phala Phala. So does that mean Paul Mashatile, who has biggest nominations as the deputy, does that mean he gets picked up from the floor? So those are some of the issues. Or does the president step aside, or he decides to take it right to the highest structure, which is the conference? But the question again, at what cost to not only the ANC, to the country, and perhaps relations across?
One word answer, should the president step aside? According to what was written and said by the ANC, should he now step aside?
In terms of what the ANC has written, he doesn't have to, because he's not criminally charged.
Okay.
But based on the weightiness of the panel who was chairing it, perhaps it may be equated to that.
Yeah, well, interesting times we're in. So today, very big day, and certainly going forward, we're going to see a lot of movement on this. In fact, even the presidential spokesperson was meant to give a media briefing today, a usual one. Vincent Mzwandile always has a media briefing to answer questions from the media. That has been cancelled. So you can imagine what the talks are behind the scenes.